We're sorry. The number you have reached is not in service. Please check the number or try your call again. This is a recording.
Are you listening?
Listen to people. Learn what you can.
What is racist and what is just ignorance?
If you've got a friend or an ally or somebody in your corner there to support you, amazing.
I just can't wait for the day where we're no longer pleasantly surprised that someone is LGBT+.
Ask questions on a personal level, do better.
Asking pronouns.
It was like the moment that I realised I was different.
Winning that award topped this year off for me.
Because without you, this world wouldn't be the same.
Are you listening?
Are you listening?
Are you listening?
Are you listening?
Welcome back to Are You Listening, the Oxfordshire Youth Podcast. Are You Listening is a podcast for young people, by young people, to discuss all of the things that they're passionate about. At Oxfordshire Youth, we wanted to make sure that young people had a space to fully express themselves in a way that they felt completely confident about. And that's how this podcast was created. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Jord and I am the host of this episode. My pronouns are he/him. And today we'll be talking about Black History Month, slightly delayed. And I'm joined by my wonderful guest. Nikki, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So, hi everyone. I'm Nikki Adebiyi, pronouns she/her. I wear multiple hats, but main one is that I'm the founder of a platform called Bounce Black, which is all about peer support and resources for young Black people who are building careers whilst navigating recovery from adversity. And yeah, thank you for having me today.
I just wanted to say before we start, actually, thank you so much for your contribution. We appreciate that you're very busy. So from me, myself and I, and everyone at the team at Oxfordshire Youth that has any involvement in this, from us to you, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I want to start by, obviously we're slightly delayed, but Black history is always significant and important. I think I want to start by talking about Windrush. I think when I think of Black history, Windrush is what sticks in my mind, or what initially comes to my head. So I'm is it second generation? So my grandparents, who over here, big up, from Jamaica in the 1960s, purely to make a better life for themselves and for all of us, and also to help the UK out with the economic crisis we had at the time. And I think more than often other people don't always recognise and appreciate how much work Black people have put into shaping Britain and making it the way it is.
100%. And yeah, thank you for sharing. And I think the Windrush generation is so fascinating to me because as a Black African, this is something that quite ashamedly, I guess, I learned about a lot later in the wake of the scandals around those who were being deported, despite the fact that many of them had initially been given or promised indefinite leave. Windrush is a story that belongs to many of my Caribbean friends that I have had to learn secondhand as a result of those controversies, because similarly my grandparents came to the UK in the 60s, but in entirely different circumstances. Yeah. And I think it's quite interesting the differences in British African and British Caribbean experiences. But when I did learn about the Windrush generation and how it essentially mirrors the US in the sense that, America was basically built off the back of slavery. And I guess to an extent in the UK, in the aftermath of the Second World War, it's mainly Black Caribbeans coming from these Commonwealth nations who helped to rebuild the UK and make it what it is, and contributed to the economy through various means, especially in the construction industry, public transport, and the NHS. And so it's something that's very, very inspiring to me to have learned about, but also grieving. just in light of how people have been treated in the last few years and the controversies that arose as a result of that. But yeah, I think Windrush is really, really, really important.
Out of curiosity then, because I'm always trying to learn and like widen my knowledge. How would you say like the I guess British African experience differs from the British Caribbean one, especially in them times? Because my knowledge is quite minimal. Like I'll happily like read whatever I come across. Like it's not something that I'm an expert in. I'm intrigued to know like what the differences are.
Yeah, I feel the same way about the British Caribbean experience. So for me, I've learned that some of my fellow like Nigerian and West African friends similarly had grandparents who came to the UK in the 60s, but many of them who came on like scholarships sponsored by I don't know, the British Council, or in other circumstances the UN. My grandfather came as a diplomat, and so it's a very, very striking difference, I think, in how our ancestors or recent ancestors arrived here. But nevertheless, I think that because of the thriving Black British community that we have as a result of Caribbeans and Africans coming together, despite the fact that our starting points in terms of how our communities originated are different, I think that being Black British itself is a relatively young identity, and that's something that's been developed as a result of the fusion of both Black Caribbean and Black African experiences in the UK.
But I also think a similarity which inevitably that Black people have, whether you're Caribbean or African, is the shared oppression, because we're all put in the same box, aren't we? Like, as sadly as it is to put it, like I've got I probably need to have more African friends than Caribbean, to be honest, and that's not even like purposely done. It just happens to be the way it is. But I think a real beautiful thing that I'm noticing quite recently is that a lot of Black people are coming together to talk about their experiences, and I don't think there is a division between Africans and Caribbeans, I would say, but I don't really have that issue. I have some friends who have gone through that, and it sounds absolutely awful because we all originate from Africa originally, centuries and centuries ago. But yeah, I'm really pleased to see the progression in solidarity between Black communities as a whole, and I think that's purely because of George Floyd and the movements which have originated in the last couple of years. And yeah, it's really refreshing to see, really reassuring as well for like further generations after our own time.
Absolutely. And you picked up on something there which I think underpins how I feel about this conversation in general, is that my approach or my initiation into all things Black definitely was rooted in Black American history, African American history. And over the years, as I've tried to learn more about Black British history and also African history, it's made me more mindful of the need to be Pan-African, which is what I believe underpins the sentiment that you were describing there about being able to appreciate Blackness wherever you find it, for all its good, but also all of its challenges. And I think that's probably why we are able to come together as a community, as you said, with the shared experiences of oppression, because obviously, even though we know amongst ourselves that our cultures have their own like nuances and differences, when you're living in majority white cultures, majority white countries, they don't see that. All they see is Black, and they treat us accordingly. And so we've had to come together and find ways to collectively survive, and therefore also collectively thrive in the face of those challenges that come with living as minorities in the West.
I do think, though, it's also, I do agree with what you're saying. Like, I think we've felt the need more than often to kind of make our own little, I don't know if subcultures is the right word, or like miniature groups. But I think it's also, like white allyship is also really, really important. Like you said, we're living in very white dominated areas, white dominated locations. My friendship group is all white. I dated mainly white people purely because there wasn't that exposure from my ends and where I live. And I think I read this thing the other day. I can't remember what the source was. I'm really bad at like finding sources and not being able to like locate them afterwards. But I read something and it was saying about how like battles or like challenges and struggles for Black people, like Black people can only do like half of the work, and then like obviously the allyship from other racial groups needs to be put in place in order for the movement to go as far as it can do, or like for the exposure to like reach as much as it should. And as important as it is to find comfort and consensus in your own groups, I think it's really, really important to like find people who are outsiders of your community, that they also are able to understand, sympathize, understand what they'll understand, but like still be able to show like ongoing like love and support more than anything else.
100%. I think especially when we're talking about the conversation around social mobility, I remember some of the really helpful advice that I received from a more senior Black woman in the legal profession, which is what I'm hoping to go down. I remember something she told me, and it stuck with me, is that sometimes the people who are going to help me get to where I need to get to aren't always going to look like me. And I think that's an important principle in the wider conversation around allyship, being able to recognize that as much as our lived experience needs to be centered in any work of like concerning Black equity, we have to center our experiences and our stories and our voices, but we can't do this work alone, especially when we are existing as minorities. We need allies who are part of the majority. We need allies who have the privileges and the power to help us advance the cause, so to speak. So yeah, I completely agree with you that the importance of allyship is something we need to be mindful of and be okay and accepting of the fact that some of the people who are going to help us get to where we need to get to will not share our characteristics and won't be Black, and that's okay.
For sure. And I also want to touch on something which I think is really important about is there anyone in particular, because I have loads of people, but I'm intrigued to hear yours first. Are there any like particular people that come to mind, like historical? I mean, is historical the right word? I guess historical, but any like Black figures that come to mind when you think, oh, like you've really like made your mark, you've really like made some significance? Is there any like one who comes to mind?
I think that's a very, very difficult question, because as we know, like the Windrush generation alone, they've many names of people who are otherwise faceless in history, which is unfortunate, apart from their families who honor their legacy. But so many people have contributed to the flourishing of this country. So I think that's an important thing to state. But yeah, there's several people, and I like that you touched on the point about whether or not the term historical should be used, because the first thing that comes to mind is the little Black girl magic moment that I had when I was an intern for a political like charity, supporting like people with mental health challenges and and their like financial circumstances. I remember part of that role involved me going to Parliament often, and I remember having this Black girl magic moment when I was just walking through the hallways of Portcullis House, which is one of the buildings in the Houses of Parliament in the UK. And I just remember walking through the hallway and seeing Dawn Butler, who is an MP. And I was just so excited to see her, and I smiled at her and she smiled at me back. And that moment has always stuck with me, because it just felt like, wow, look at where I am and look at where she is. And we always said was hi to each other in passing, but there was weight behind that hi, behind that hello, and the smiles. Like, I can't even explain it, but that's one of my precious memories that I have. And yeah, speaking of Black women MPs, obviously, however you feel about people's politics, I'm still very much in admiration of Diane Abbott, who was the first Black female MP in the UK. Several other Black British figures that have contributed throughout history include, obviously, Mary Seacole, the nurse, Olaudah Equiano, the abolitionist and former slave, and many of us learned about Benjamin Zephaniah, a poet, back in school days. Like, that's a name that goes way back for me. So I just think there's a long list of people who have contributed to the UK who are Black. And yeah, it's a shame that my memory fails me in this moment, but those are just some of the names I can think of. And even in preparing for this conversation, I was reading about three men, Paul Stevenson, Guy Bailey, and Roy Hackett, who led the Bristol bus boycott. And that's, to be honest with you, I didn't even know that happened. I did not know that happened. I'm very well aware of Rosa Parks and Montgomery, Alabama, and their bus boycott, but didn't even know that similar happened in the UK. But the difference is, in Alabama, they were fighting for the rights of Black passengers to sit anywhere, whereas in the UK, they were fighting for the rights of Black drivers in public sector employment. So yeah, there's just so many names that I hadn't heard of, that I still probably haven't heard of, which became more apparent as I was preparing for this. And it just makes me realize, wow, Black people have really done a lot for this country. And unfortunately, their praises haven't been sung enough, sadly.
I feel like a lot of the, currently, I think there's a lot of Black people in the UK making a lot of noise creatively, which I think is only been, I think even I was talking to the editor of this podcast about this a few weeks ago, and it's really amazing to see how many creators have really made noise in the last 5 years, and entertainers. For my biggest one that I always think of was Michaela Cole. I'm obsessed with her. She can do absolutely no wrong in my eyes. I just saw her in Black Panther.
Facts.
Absolutely love her. I saw her in Black Panther last week, and I watched a really interesting interview. And she even said, she was like, the only reason I took the role was because the character was a queer character. And I thought, oh my God, let's go, come on. So I think she definitely comes to mind. Also, who else is there? Zizi Mills. I think she's absolutely incredible. I think the work that she's doing is really, really important. Who else is there? And then all the Black podcasts, they're all making amazing moves as well. I'm here for literally every single one of them. And I'm really happy to be in a place where there's just so many Black creators. And I think what makes it even better is they're all very different. They've all got a very authentic, unique element to their work, which is just amazing, because obviously it's so often we're all seen or categorized as people who are into rap, into drill, are deprived, misfortunate. Do you know what I mean? That can be the case, but it's not always. And I don't know, I just think we're in a really good place, and I'm here to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as you were speaking, I was just thinking about how amazing Black British culture is. I think going back to some of the stuff that we spoke about earlier as well, is just how, I think I remember reading that Black British culture, or Black British as an identity, is quite new, and it's got a combination of influence from West African cultures, Caribbean cultures, in terms of the language of our subculture, the slang that we have, the banter that we have. And I just think it's a really wonderful testament to the integration within Black communities in the UK, and how culturally our contributions to the UK are becoming more. I know earlier I mentioned that a lot of Black British historical figures have slipped under the radar from like the wider public consciousness. But I think even figures like Stormzy and some of the ones that you mentioned, like, I just think when I reflect on my school experience, I'd never imagined someone like Stormzy would be so publicly out there. And grime has become mainstream owing to various rappers. I can't name them. My memory is failing me here, but like, yeah, just the way Stormzy headlines like festivals and things like that. I just find that amazing, and how he's just one representative and emblem of this melting pot that we call Black British culture.
Yeah, there's definitely a wave at the moment of a lot of hip hop artists really making moves, like so many to the point I don't think I can even name them because it would just take too long. Obviously, like Stormzy has literally like hit the fan, hasn't he? He's you couldn't even like predict his success. It's absolutely incredible, and he also like refers back to his culture and his people all the time, which I'm like obsessed with. And then you have like Santan Dave, AJ Tracy, like Digga D, and all of them, and yeah, no, they're all like truly incredible and are doing so well for themselves. You just said a really good point, which I think is quite interesting. I find that like sometimes when we talk about, let's say, Black history as a whole, let's not limit it to Black British history, like in like curriculums and stuff as well, I think Black American history is very dominating, very dominating. Like you said, like Rosa Parks, Martin Luther. I don't know what your circumstances were at school, but I remember the Black curriculum being very minimal, next to nothing. And then for the coverage that we did have was very Americanized, which can be quite infuriating, because I find that, I mean, I acknowledge that Black British history is very significant, and also it shaped me. Do you know what I mean? It shapes you. I find it, but I know they've started something recent. I know they've started the Black curriculum. I don't know how far it's gotten. I follow the page on Instagram, but I haven't seen any updates for a while. I know that was like in the process a year or two ago. But obviously, getting things onto a curriculum can take like a vast amount of time. But I think I find it quite frustrating and quite, I guess, infuriating how there's so much Black history which I wasn't very conscious about until I started doing my degree, and that's, do you know what I mean, that's not accessible to a lot of people. So then learning about what, like, I don't know, like Stuart Hall, Paul Gilroy, who else is there? I can't think of anyone else on the top of my head, but you know what I mean? There's so many like significant people that have like done a lot of work or researched work and made all these findings about so many contributions and just events and just witnessing really crucial things happening. But if you don't do, I don't know, if you don't do deeper work, further work, you're never going to discover that, which is quite annoying because not everyone has the access to be able to find things like that in the first place. And it's like, I don't know, it's almost like sometimes we can't really distinguish the difference between Britishness and Americanness, is that right? Americanness, because America is obviously a lot more dominating in pop culture, coverage, and just, well, yeah, just being exposure in general, which can be quite annoying. Well, yeah, more than annoying, to be honest.
It's so interesting that you say that, because I think my experience has been the same, and that's, yeah, it is a shame. Yeah, definitely Black History Month during school days for me definitely centered around the Black American experience, and I think that's important. It's definitely important for us to be aware of what took place on the other side of the Atlantic, because, you know, in terms of racism, the US and the UK, they're cousins. Like, let's not think that this is just a them problem. But I think that also points to the inadequacy of the curriculum as we experienced it growing up, where racism was so contextualized within the Black American experience that we weren't necessarily exposed to how things, how racism took shape here in the UK. And I think that's a problem. I've definitely got I've said this already, I've got like a long laundry list of names and sources and resources to look into. But yeah, one of the books that have been on my to read list for a while, which now as a result of this conversation, I would probably put on my priority list for next year, is David Olusoga's Black and British book, the subtitle of which is A Forgotten History. And I think that's exactly right. It is a forgotten history because, as we've both said, we grew up with a curriculum centered around the US. And even when I went to university and I started to develop more of an interest in the Black experience, the Black diaspora experience, it was still very much couched in non-British sources. Like I remember reading W.E.B. Du Bois and Frederick Douglass and all of those really important historical figures in Black American history. But yeah, I think that when the American experience is centered to the exclusion of Blackness elsewhere, I think we have an incomplete vision of the Black experience, or an incomplete picture, an image of the Black experience worldwide. And I think in the spirit of Pan-Africanism, if we're going to be concerned about the state of Black folk across the globe, then we need to be a lot more well-versed in the history of their experiences and how they got to where they are. And yeah, that's the only way we're going to effectively advocate for changes today, by properly having an understanding of where each of the groups of Black people have come from, socially and socioeconomically speaking and politically speaking.
I think, I feel like the way forward in order to make that exposure more visible and more apparent in curriculums is by, I wish I was up to date with how the Black curriculum's going so I could comment better on this. But I think one crucial thing is to make these arising issues apparent to people who are in charge of how the education curriculum works. So people in Parliament who have the final tick to say what goes and what doesn't. I want to move on to the work that you're doing, because obviously it's really important to recognise the stuff that Black people are creating. Myself and everyone at Oxfordshire Youth are really amazed by what you're doing at Bounce Back. So I'd love for you to give us like a run through of what you've been doing, if that's all right.
Bounce Back is my baby. It's a passion project that was born out of lived experience. So I mentioned it's all about providing peer support and psychoeducation for young Black people navigating recovery from adversity alongside building careers. And that's something that came as a result of my own journey navigating recovery from anxiety and depression throughout school, throughout university, and even now as I'm trying to, build my career and hopefully the legal profession and beyond. I just remember a couple of years ago just reflecting on how far I've come and just thinking about the things that made the difference, the tools that made the difference, and how over the years people had been reaching out to me for mental health support for themselves or for someone that they know. And I just started to think, what can I do to build like a single reference point that people can go to find some of these resources that I mostly stumbled across in my journey, which have helped me and might also be beneficial to other people. And so, in I think it was December of 2019, the idea came to mind to create this platform. And then I eventually did so and launched it in 2020. In the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a panorama, pentatonic, however you want to call it. But I just was very much conscious of the fact that had I had access to the resources and knowledge that I have had that have helped my recovery much sooner, I think my story would have been different much earlier. That said, I'm not massively regretful, because obviously the things that I've been through led to me creating this. But yeah, so that's like the story of the high level story of Bounce Black. And so initially it was just about posting psychoeducational concepts and making it accessible for young Black people on Instagram. Then we branched out into blogs. I should also say that I'm thankfully supported by a small team of volunteer friends, a doctor, Vicky, a therapist in training, Chinadu, a qualified therapist already, Mapalo, and also a ambassador, previously a student ambassador, Michelle. And yeah, they support in various ways. And I'm just thankful that in the past couple years since launching, I've just had the opportunity to share my story, but also to platform other people's. And I think that's my grand or wider vision for Bounce Black, to platform people's stories of overcoming hurdles and obstacles in their lives. Because for me, I just felt like a lot of the time when I was going through what I was going through, I felt like I was alone. I know I wasn't alone, and I did have support at various points in my journey, but it was still quite a lonely time for me in terms of like pursuing real recovery and not really knowing what that meant or looks like. So I think what has made the difference is knowing that there are people out there who have gone through really real things and similar things, but they've still managed to build a life for themselves that they are pleased with and that they are happy about. And I think that's what Bounce Back is all about, to be able to enhance and utilize the power of storytelling to encourage people to keep going wherever they are in their journeys and in their stories, to just remind them that, you know, life can get really real. Life can be really hard, but that doesn't mean you can't live a meaningful life on the other side of those hard things, and that you can't, live a life that you're proud of and pursue your dreams or variations of your dreams. So yeah, that's what Bounce Back is all about. And I'm thankful to have collaborated with Penguin in the past to do a giveaway of the book that changed my life, The Body Keeps the Score. Very thankful for that opportunity, and for the opportunities to come. I'm excited.
I want to say, big up to you, because I think in times of difficulty and struggle, it's very hard to make something and to try and find, try and make resources, not only for yourself, but for other people. So like, I want to say for myself and everyone, like, honestly, well done for making what you've done, because it's absolutely phenomenal to have made what you have made and for it to have long-lasting significance to this very day, and to also have like, I feel like having volunteers, like, it's always like a really good sign that what you're doing is like doing well. Like, I feel like having volunteers is a sign that what you're doing is clearly like making moves and making noise, which is what we want to hear. And I like the part about you saying about how I think when we have times of struggle and difficulty, it's really important to have people that we can collide with, join with, and obviously having what you've made has made that visible resource and facility for people, which is really fundamental. Yeah, I just think the work you're doing is really incredible. I'm really happy to be in the same space with you, because I think it's like truly like amazing. Like, honestly, big up you. 100.
I'm so honored. Thank you for your kind words. I just want to emphasize that that's exactly why it was important for me to stress that Bounce Black is a peer support resource. So nothing that I do is about coming as some high person, some expert who is coming to tell you about your problems and coming to give you the solutions. It's all about community for me, and showing that I'm walking alongside you in this process. Like, it's very much a for us, by us kind of movement or mission, because it's really important for people to know that it's not just about, obviously in when it comes to recovery, you do sometimes need the help of experts to help you understand your experiences, to give you the language, to help you to recover. But I still felt it was important to make it known that this is a peer-to-peer platform. And that means that even to this day, I'm still having to bounce back. So yeah, it was just important for me to just do what I do, which is to just be real and authentic about what I'm experiencing, what I'm going through, and what I'm doing to overcome what I'm going through, and encouraging other people to not be afraid to share about their experiences and know that someone is navigating similar things as you, and just to inspire people to keep going in and amongst the hardship, because you're not the only one. And I don't say that in a condescending way, but in a way to encourage you to keep going, because there are people who understand, and we're walking with you.
I think that's a really crucial message, like you said, to remind people that they're not alone, but there are people around you who are more than likely going through something similar. So like, find your people and have comfort in that, so you know that's a guidance, or that's like an incentive to be like, you're not alone, and you have people that you can talk to who have gone through similar experiences and encounters, and hopefully that will create like a sense of security in one way or another. What are like do you have any like particular like joyful moments, like achievements that like make you like, I don't know, like come to like the realization, think, wow, like we're really making changes, and like they're really, I mean, they're visible, like people can hear them. Is there anything that comes to mind?
Absolutely. So I think 2022 has been a movie of a year for me, but I think one thing that comes to mind is the work that I've been fortunate enough to do with the Emerging Minds Network. So just last month we had the Emerging Minds Summit, which brought together all of the key contributors and stakeholders of the Emerging Minds Network to talk about our work. And to expand a bit more, for the past couple of years, I've been a young advisor to the network alongside Jawad, Mustafa, and Fury Gezai. And we were looking into the impact of racism on children and young people's mental health in the UK. And so the culmination of that work, which involved things like literature reviews to see what exists on this topic already, which wasn't much, as we came to find, and then identifying priorities for research, which involved speaking to young people to hear their thoughts about this, as well as practitioners who work with young people. And then we also put out a funding call, and in the end funded 3 different research projects in this area. And so what happened in the summit last month was we were reflecting on our experiences being part of this network and doing the work that we did, and how much we personally benefited from co-design and co-production, so being involved in the process at every stage, but also just the fact that this summit took place at the University of Oxford, which is something that I never imagined I would ever do, because it's not a space that I grew up believing was for me or for people like myself. Like I remember I didn't bother applying to Oxford for my undergrad, because I just thought it's not a place for me. It's not a place for people like me. So it just felt like a full circle feeling smashing moment where I found myself in the streets and hallways of the spaces and places I once believed to be impenetrable and inaccessible. So that's something that I'm really excited about and thankful for.
I'm really happy to hear about all the things that you've been able to achieve. It's really refreshing, isn't it, to be able to put yourself in places and positions which you didn't even think were feasible for people as a whole, let alone Black people. It's really refreshing to be able to hear that. I'm really glad to hear that you're being able to make the moves that you're making. Why are spaces for Black joy so important?
I love this question. I think the simplest way to put it would be that we need to avoid reinforcing the idea that we are a race that only knows sorrow. I think it's important to constantly remind ourselves that our history is much more than our pain and that our legacies will be much more than our pain. I think it's important to remember that our ancestors didn't only shed tears, but they also knew laughter. And that's not to say that we should whitewash our history and stick our fingers in our ears, ignoring Black trauma, but it's important to just remember that we are more than those things. We're not just the things that we've been through, but we're also what we have done to survive and thrive, and joy is a large part of that. And I think when it comes to thinking about Black joy, Black culture embodies Black joy, because each of our Black cultures, whether you're African or Caribbean, it embodies vibrancy. We are a people who are lively, and that's reflected in our celebrations, our cuisine, our entertainment, music, everything. And so, especially for those of us who are in the West, America, UK, wherever, we've survived the toxicity that came with the pandemic and being stuck inside and having to see and listen to people's true colors coming out online amidst all the Black Lives Matter stuff. Many of us during that time were, and some still are, tired and drained. But it's really important that we find ways to replenish ourselves and nurture ourselves on the other side of that. And Black joy is the essence.
Black joy is very essential and pivot. Yeah, Black joy is very essential and pivotal. I think more than often, especially for us because we're in spaces which are very white dominated, it's very refreshing to have spaces which can be specifically for Black people. And I think also it's really important to distinguish the difference between Black empowerment and Black domination. So I don't agree with Black domination, because I just think I think domination as a whole is just excluding everyone completely, which I don't agree with. However, though, when you have Black empowerment, it's okay, let's have spaces and areas and facilities which prioritize Black people for whatever reason from A to Z. However, other people are able to come into those spaces, but it needs to be made fundamentally clear that Black people are the center and the principle of for whatever the activity is. And I'm finding myself in the last year or so gravitating more towards friendships with Black people more than before prior, not purely because of having similar ideas cultures and interests. And it's really, it's really reassuring and really refreshing to be able to talk to people and not be the educator, And I think that's why personally what I find Black joy to be so essential and so prominent.
Yeah, for sure. I think, we've already spoken about allyship and solidarity, but I think that it comes back to the point that I made about us being tired and so therefore gravitating to where there isn't that much work to be done. And that's more often than not amongst ourselves.
Obviously, we've spoken about the moans and the groans and the consequences, but I really think it's important to leave this on a happy note. With regards to the current circumstances, socially, politically, economically, what are you hopeful for? I guess for Black people, for the Black community.
Well, that's a great question, and I think the first thing that comes to mind, and I'm really glad that you said for Black people, because that was my immediate thought anyway. I'm very much rooting for everybody Black. But as part of that, I think I'm just really excited about what we are doing for ourselves in this moment and despite this moment. We've spoken about so many people already who are doing their part to move the culture forward. And I think I'm just really excited about all of the little waves being made here and there. There's a saying I love to just, it applies in many ways, and I apply it to, I use it in reference to different situations, but what I usually say is every ripple becomes a part of the stream. And I think the way Black people, Black British people are making waves in their own corners of the country, in their own spheres of influence, the little that we're doing, I'm just really excited to see what the culmination is going to be like in the grand scheme of things over time. All of these little, and some of them are not so little. Obviously, people are really, really doing big things out here. They're doing bits, but I'm just excited about our direction when we think about how all of these little, in air quotes, little changes are going to add up, and the future that that's going to create. So that's just a general point that I'm really excited about, but I'm also just hopeful about the healthier and holistic legacies that we're going to leave as a result of these changes for future generations. In the spirit of talking about mental health and well-being and Bounce Black, I think it's very important to me to envision and strive after a legacy that is more than just like wealth and property and things like that. It's about healing and undoing toxic ways of living and unhealthy patterns of relating to one another. And I'm just so excited that as part of the wider shift in how people think about and talk about mental health, I'm just excited about that. The fact that it's the norm, or it's becoming the norm for people to go to therapy, for example, and increasingly so within the Black community. And I think we've come a long way from like being a culture that generally likes to keep things within the family and not share too much about our personal lives outside of the home. I think we've come a long way from being a hush and get on with it culture, and I'm just so excited to see the futures that we create for if you have children, but just in general, I'm very excited for the legacies that we are in the middle of building for ourselves.
So I just want to say, Nikki, thank you so much for talking to us. We appreciate how busy you are, your contributions, your inputs, and for your insight. We really appreciate it. So from myself and from everyone at Oxfordshire Youth, thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Jord. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Darius for inviting me. And it's been lovely also to meet with Becky and various other people this year from Oxfordshire Youth. So again, thank you so much for having me. And I enjoyed speaking with you.
If you enjoyed this episode of Are You Listening, make sure you subscribe, whether you're on Anchor, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. And also make sure you're following us on social media as well, at Oxfordshire Youth on Instagram and TikTok, and at Ox Youth on Twitter.